Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You know, I've been here listening to great and distinguished speakers extol the virtues of Ned McWherter, and I was just telling my wife, Dolores, I don't know anything else that I can say about Ned that hasn't been said. And so I'm going to be brief. I'm going to be brief because of that and also because I've got to go to the bathroom. You know, tonight, Andrew Jackson, the seventh President of the United States, summons Democrats to come together once more to honor his name and legacy, which includes certainly the founding of this great party. And I look out over this crowd. We've responded to his call in amazing numbers for a very special reason, a reason you've heard from so many speakers, to honor another great leader, the 48th public servant to serve as governor of Tennessee, the Honorable Ned McWherter. Ned McWherter was my good friend. He was my close friend. About 3 weeks before his death, ill with cancer, and knowing that I was suffering from the same disease, he called me on the phone one day, and with tongue-in-cheek and in great good humor as always, he said, "John, you know we have shared many things, most of them pleasant, some unpleasant, over these years, but I never thought we'd share the same oncologist." But indeed we did. You know, he was a man with a great sense of humor. But if you knew him, you understand that he would laugh with you, even as he was willing to laugh at himself. I watched the video on the screen that bring him back to life with such vitality. I hear him in that interview with journalists speaking of two opponents, two members of the Republican Party, speaking of them with great respect, with great affection, with great good humor. And it reminds us that there was a time when civility, a time when decency in public discourse, when friendliness in political rhetoric brought people together for the common good. How things have changed. How refreshing it is to hear Ned speak of Governor Alexander and Governor Dunn with respect with high regard, with an acknowledgement for their achievements and accomplishments, even as he stood across the aisle, a member of a party who stood, more often than not, for causes different from theirs. To Ned McWherter, civility was a way of political life, and how we miss that today. I think when I think of President Jackson, and when I think of Ned McWherter, I think of two great public servants, each of whom rejected flatly the idea that prevails so widely in so many parts of the country and even in this state today. They rejected flatly the idea that government is the enemy of the people. Government is the friend and servant of the people. Jackson felt that, and Ned McWherter felt it in the depth of his soul and the core of his bones. Jackson and McWherter felt for the common man. Both stood for the working men and women of this state and of this country. When Jackson spoke of the people who made up the sinew and bone of this country, he specifically mentioned the farmers, the mechanics, the laborers, and these were the people who formed the bone and sinew of this state. Support for Ned McWherter, support for progressive government, support for equal rights and equal justice. Ned McWherter was a man who had great love for politics, great love for government, great affection for people, and like Jackson, Ned McWherter believed the people were sovereign, sovereign in all things. You know, if President Jackson were here tonight, he'd be the first to raise his voice in praise of the civil approach that marked the life of Ned McWherter. President Jackson himself, as most of you know, there were moments when a little incivility crept into his political rhetoric. And sometimes he backed it up with a sword, and sometimes with a pistol, and sometimes with a cuss word. You know, I once asked Ned McWherter during one of these dinners if he could tell me, if he knew, one of Jackson's favorite quotations. And without hesitating, he said, yes. And I said, what is it? And he said this, and he quoted it. And these are Jackson's words. It is a damn poor man. I'm sorry. I don't want to misquote President Jackson. It is a damn poor mind that can't think of at least two ways to spell a word. Now, Ned told that, and we both laughed at it. But you know, I think of the words of Jackson, and each time I do, they ring a bell of recollection about Ned McWherter. Jackson said, "One man with courage is a majority." That's what Jackson said. Ned McWherter was that man. Andrew Jackson said, the rich and the powerful too often bend the acts of government to their own selfish purposes, and again this day, we know that is true. And as we think of Ned McWherter, we think of how he rejected that concept from beginning to end. Andrew Jackson said the people are the government, the supreme power. Jackson said it, and Ned McWherter believed it to the depth of his heart. Andrew Jackson said, every good citizen makes his country's honor his own honor, and he cherishes it as sacred. Ned believed that in the depth of his soul. You know, in my mind's eye, I can imagine President Jackson being here tonight. And if he were, he'd be the first and want to be the first and last to raise his voice in honor of Ned. And he'd also raise his glass. He occasionally lifted a glass. He'd lift his glass to Ned. He'd lift his glass to the courage of Ned McWherter. He'd lift his glass to the sense of loyalty that reflected Ned McWherter's life. He'd lift his glass to Ned's deep affection for family, for his son Mike, in whom he had such great pride throughout Mike's campaign for governor. He'd lift his glass to Ned McWherter's great heart, that great heart that beat with such affection for this state and its people. He'd lift his glass to Ned's vision, a vision for the poor and the powerless in this country. His vision, as you've seen in that video, vision for the children of this state in his effort to make better schools better still. He'd lift his glass to Ned's wisdom, reminding us all of how Ned's wisdom benefited us. Think, if you would, of the wisdom and how it benefited during their administration, Bill Clinton and Al Gore. President Clinton said, "Ned McWherter lifts me up. When I'm down, he raises my spirits." And the truth of the matter is, what he did for President Clinton, he did for all of us. His legacy will be that we remember him. And because of what he was, because of our memory of him, we all had a glass of wine earlier. I ask you in your mind's eye to lift your glass to Ned McWherter. With Jackson's, long may his legacy live in this state. Long may his commitment to civility and decency and equal justice live in this state. Here's to Ned McWherter. I miss you, Ned.